Good morning and welcome back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics live stream. I am your host, Sarah, and I am joined once again by my favorite co-host, John, and friend of the show and our resident Black Pill distributor, former Navy nuke, Mark Sleboda. But first, here is a really quick ad from our new sponsor. Join DD Geopolitics as we team up with Futuur, the leading prediction market platform. Dive into the world of forecasting where you can predict outcomes in global politics, conflict zones, sports, and more. Test the geopolitical insights you've learned here and see how you fare against a global community of thinkers. Join the already active community, follow other users, participate in discussions, and exchange strategies. Futuur regularly adds new markets, often according to user suggestions, creating a very unique user experience. Whether you're a seasoned analyst or a curious newcomer, Futuur offers a dynamic way to engage with world events. Visit futuur.com or click the link below to start predicting and winning today. And we're back. John, how are you this morning?
Doing great. The black clouds have not rolled in here where I'm at. And,
they're about to. Mark Sleboda's on the show.
I'm expecting they're about to. Oh, but we're doing good. I'm glad to see you.
How are you? How is Russia? How are things in the normal world?
It's too fucking hot. I don't do this summer thing. I live in the Great White North. I should not have to put up with 90-degree summers.
We're gonna get started. I
asked my wife. I'm like, can we move to Murmansk? Can you work in Murmansk?
Or Vladivostok. Put you out in the Far East. So we have a lot of things, kind of a mixed bag of things going on, a potpourri, if you will. So let's start with.
Hold on. Let me compliment you on the intro.
Oh,
that was fabulous and stirring, and the shots of Givy, Motorola, bringing up memories of Mozgovoy, Zaharchenko. Those deaths are gonna haunt me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, forever.
Yeah, they are. And that smirking face of Zelensky on stage sitting next to Merkel. Are you smirking now, you son of a bitch?
I'm so glad Mark's on today. Really good energy for Friday morning. All right, Mark, let's watch it.
Friday morning. It's Friday.
Friday night with your kvass.
Friday night for me. I'm done for the week.
Let's see the Ursula striking Tel Aviv finally.
Ты видишь, дрон летит? Крестюш, ты видишь, что это такое? Блядь! Пиздец, это с какой стороны? Еще вторая фигня летит. Сейчас, подожди, я в убежище.
We had one drone get through, AD and warning system failure. Ursula taking credit for it. Isn't that kind of far? What kind of drone could they have been using that would be able to traverse that amount of airspace and flying over hostile territory?
I'm sure it was not released from Lebanon. I'm sure it was released something much closer, and that does not look like a long range drone by any stretch of the imagination. It sounds like a lawnmower.
Yep, it sounds like a Shahed. Any idea why the air defense system would fail?
Well, defense systems are very particular, and the air defense systems of Israel are quite normally attuned to stopping rockets firing. And a low-flying drone probably released somewhere, within Israeli territory, almost certainly is something that could avoid air defense that wasn't looking for it. I mean, it's that simple. Air defense is very particular. It's good at some things. It's not good at others. And when you're looking for one thing and a drone pops up, from behind where you're expecting it, then, you get that. But this is obviously a message, right? This is a response, a message, but it's not something that is a military challenge yet. But I guess
So you don't think this is indicative of some of the strain that Israel's seeing on some of its resources? Of course, it's dealing with Hezbollah in the north. We're hearing reports that the economic impact from Yemen's blockade in the Red Sea is having some overall, macroeconomic impacts on Israel. Do you think this is more of just a case of something slipping under the radar than something more systemic?
Yeah, for one drone, yeah. I mean, that's not to say that Israel isn't stretched thin. I mean, recently the U.S. was started to pressure Israel to deliver these old, antiquated Patriot systems that Israel was preparing to mothball, but then they went and hit the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and then Iranians' reply convinced them that, we might need every bit of air defense we can, no matter how old and shitty a Patriot system it is. So they wanted them to hold on to them. And the U.S., for the first time, that it actually floors me, the U.S. was pressuring Israel to deliver air defense systems to the Kiev regime in Ukraine. That is, it is prioritizing the Kiev regime's defense over that of Israel. And that, to me, is indicative, one, of how serious the Biden administration still is about the Kiev regime, and two, how strained the U.S., the Biden, not the U.S. relationship, but the Biden administration's relationship with the Netanyahu regime. That is, obviously extremely strained. But however stretched thin Israeli air defense is, one drone is not indicative of the strain on the system, which is not to say that the strain on the system isn't there. But if Israel goes ahead with, Netanyahu's rhetoric, which, to be fair, we've heard him blathering and bloviating about it for months, and they still haven't launched the much ballyhooed expansion of the war right big on Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is letting them know that they can reach out and touch Israel with more than just rockets, even if Israel doesn't come into Lebanon proper.
I like that you brought up the possible movement of the Patriot systems to Ukraine and giving a specific signal that Kiev is a little bit more important as a priority right now than Israel. That's pretty important. I do want to touch on the ICJ ruling that we all probably, not you, but Mark, because you live in the real world, but we all woke up to today, the ICJ ruling, and we'll play the clip for our listeners just so they know what was said.
A number of participants have argued that Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory amount to segregation or apartheid in breach of Article 3 of CERD. Article 3 of CERD provides as follows, I quote, "States parties particularly condemn racial segregation and apartheid and undertake to prevent, prohibit, and eradicate all practices of this nature in territories under their jurisdiction." This provision refers to two particularly severe forms of racial discrimination, racial segregation, and apartheid. The court observed that Israel's legislation and measures impose and serve to maintain a near complete separation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem between the settler and Palestinian communities. For this reason, the court considered that Israel's legislation and measures constitute a breach of Article 3 of CERD. Having found that Israel's settlement policy, its acts of annexation, and its related discriminatory legislation and measures are in breach of international law.
So once again, what we already knew is that the settlements are illegal. Now what?
Wow, nothing. I mean, it's a non-binding or advisory opinion after decades. I mean, It's nice to see, but do you actually think either the Israeli regime or the U.S. government cares about it?
No. Well, the U.S. won't. But do you think that any of the other signatories will care? Or U.S. isn't a signatory, so.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that the Europeans will hem and haw and will couch their words and will play games and dance around the issue. They'll pretend like they care and but do nothing. But no, I mean, there's a world, a theoretical world of international law and justice, and that's all well and good. But it's only applied by victor countries, that is, by the West, when they have the force to do so. That's it. Other than that, it's not applied evenly. It's not just. It's actually a form of tyranny. So I don't have much respect for such body. I mean, this comes out of the same realm of international law and jurisprudence that issued an arrest warrant for Putin for saving, for facilitating East Europeans pulling their own children and orphans out of the range of artillery, or Shoigu and Gerasimov for targeting electrical infrastructure, which has been the hallmark of every U.S. and NATO attack on another country going back to World War II. So I don't have a lot of respect for the idea of international jurisprudence. At best, it is victor's justice when the West can force it and leverage their institutional capture of things like the International Criminal Court. This one slipped by them, but it slipped by them primarily because it is a non-binding advisory opinion. And sure, it will add to talking points of those of us who do recognize that Israel has been, ethnic cleansing and annexing Palestine by settlement for decades. But it's been happening for decades, and this is what we get now as a non-binding advisory opinion. I guess it's better than nothing.
Every bit, is better than nothing. But John brought up the situation of the IOF, and I wanted to ask you, militarily speaking, kind of what their capabilities and what their manpower is looking like. About 2 weeks ago, it was really funny because 2 weeks ago, this article came out, this IDF needing 10,000 more recruits. And then shortly after that, the Israeli officials in France said France is no longer safe for Jews. You should come back to Israel. And I thought that was really funny that they need 10,000 more bodies, and they're telling all the Jews to come home. Do they need 10,000 bodies? Are the losses that high? Or is this for the Hezbollah, or is this to get people into more settlements? What is it? Just bodies?
Yeah. So first of all, it also coincides with the Israeli court, and also being pushed by the Netanyahu administration for the ultra-Orthodox students also to be subject to the draft as well. I don't know even if Netanyahu knows what he is going to be doing. Obviously, he's got various plans, that he can put into motion. But I believe that his primary intention is just to continue the conflict as long as possible. Which conflict? Any conflict, right? Conflict with Hamas, which is to say the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip, conflict with the Palestinians of the West Bank, conflict with Hezbollah, always hoping to draw Iran into the conflict proper, so that then the U.S. would be forced to come to Israel's rescue, which is, I believe, has always been his ultimate goal. And to give the Biden administration credit, should we really even be calling it the Biden administration? To give the Blinken and Sullivan administration credit, they don't want conflict with Iran right now, right? Mm-hmm. It's not want conflict with Iran in principle or in general, but they're at least smart enough to understand that with the conflict in Ukraine, the proxy war in Ukraine going south, and the constant brinkmanship with China in the Pacific, that they can't, that the Middle East is low on their priority list. And, I've said it before, there's only 3 flavors of bureaucrats and politicians in Washington. They all want war with Russia, China, and Iran as part of US-led Western global hegemony, but they prioritize those conflicts differently. And certainly there are people within the US government that want to go to war with Iran yesterday, but that's not the ones in charge of this administration. So they've been trying to avoid this conflict. And when they make deals with Iran for Iran to strike Israel under controlled circumstances so that Iran can save face, and they have to have a huge expenditure of air defense anyway, in the issue, then obviously the Biden administration does not want war with Iran in the Middle East now. They don't want to get off their focus, such as it is. So that leaves Netanyahu hanging. All right, obviously he is looking forward to a Trump administration, because again, Trump is a chaos bomb, and we can hope that they'll make moves towards winding down U.S. support for the Kiev regime in Ukraine. Certainly, the selection of J.D. Vance is the most positive signal that I've gotten. But we also, as the Russian government, takes pains to remind us that it was under the prior Trump administration that things got to how bad they were, and that they put 40 rounds of sanctions on Russia, despite Trump campaigning the one consistent issue of foreign policy that he campaigned on was he wanted to improve relations with Russia. So that didn't go so well. And ultimately, Trump is bound by the officials that constitute the deep state and the small number of elected, or a small number of his appointments that rule over them. But there's only so many people of the qualifications necessary to hold these top government positions that are, shall we say, Ukraine proxy war skeptics, right? I mean, they can't staff the entire state and national security apparatus out of the Kinsey Institute. It's not going to happen. So Trump, for me, is always a chaos bomb. And you just don't know where that chaos bomb is going to go off. If it goes off in the US, great, wonderful, right? Give me some popcorn. If the chaos bomb instead goes off in the direction of Russia, or starts another major geopolitical conflict in the Middle East, these rumors, these tips that were being put about in the Western media over the last week, trying to toss out there this non-connection between the Trump assassination attempt in Iran, that's obviously Israel. I mean, come on. I mean, that is obviously the Israeli intelligence or the Netanyahu administration itself, trying to set up a big glowing arrow for when Trump assumes office, to point him right in the direction of.
Why did he really need any pointing? I mean, you said it yourself. We'll just play the video, and they're really ready to go to war with Iran with the incoming administration. Here we go.
I tell you this: we want our hostages back, and they better be back before I assume office, or you will be paying a very big price. With our victory in November, the years of war, weakness, and chaos will be over. I don't have wars. I had no wars other than ISIS, which I defeated, but that was a war that was started. We had no wars. I could stop wars with a telephone call. I could stop wars with just a telephone call. If properly stated, it would never start. We will replenish our military and build an Iron Dome missile defense system to ensure that no enemy can strike our homeland. And this great Iron Dome will be built entirely in the USA. We're going to build it.
not so sure from that clip whether Trump is campaigning to be the president of the United States or campaigning to be the president of Israel.
Thank
I really
you.
couldn't tell. So, I mean, first of all, no wars. Yeah, I mean, you only militarily occupied East Syria, something that continues to this day, sitting on Syria's oil and wheat fields, and you were glad to do it for the oil, even though that wasn't the reason why the neocons put it on your plate. They just recognized, what was required, the little airplane that was required to get Trump to eat the food, the Syria occupation down. And he assassinated Qasem Soleimani and several top Iraqi generals. I mean, okay, maybe that wasn't a new war, but it very easily would have been justification for one if Iran had been looking for one, or even hadn't been fearing one.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, this is the guy who, like you said, killed Soleimani. And then when he did it, he tweeted an American flag like it was so badass. He hasn't apologized for it. He still probably thinks it was great. So Americans need to keep in mind this is the same guy, right? And
I
to your point earlier, Mark, it's just a shift.
Defeated ISIS.
I defeated ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
That's really funny, because those same ISIS fighters are now part of the Syrian Democratic Forces, right? Thousands and thousands of them. The tribes that were allied, that were part of ISIS are now part of the U.S. military proxy occupation force for East Syria. Putin defeated ISIS. I mean, Assad defeated ISIS. Soleimani defeated ISIS. And that was something that was even briefly admitted by the U.S. government, the role that the popular mobilization units did in saving Baghdad when the NATO trained forces threw down their weapons and ran, like they do in so many different places.
Yeah, so Trump is going to, he's going to bring peace to the Middle East. He's going to bring peace to Ukraine. He's going to basically save the world. We've got that much from him. But in his address yesterday at the RNC, he hit quite a bit on foreign policy. And he talked about how, the United States has gone so downhill over the course of the last 4 years. One of the really interesting points, Mark, that I'm going to play the video and I'm interested to get your reaction. But Trump talked about Venezuela and El Salvador as being better places to hold the next RNC than the United States. I want you to listen to this.
Really a dangerous place, but not anymore. Because in Venezuela, crime is down 72%. In fact, if they would ever win this election, I hate to even say that, we will have our next Republican convention in Venezuela because it will be safe. Our cities will be so unsafe, we won't be able. We will not be able to have it there. In El Salvador, murders are down by 70%. Why are they down?
I'm sorry, is he praising socialist governments there?
He was praising Maduro right there. And I mean, you see this with Trump. It's not a new thing where there's disdain, there's criticism, but it's always mixed with this sense of flattery and almost admiration, right? Whether it's for people like Maduro or Kim Jong-un. So kind of interested to get your thoughts there. I mean, maybe there are expected things that we don't foresee a Trump administration being able to accomplish. Maybe there are some avenues there to have detente with some of the kind of longstanding adversaries of the United States. But I don't know what you make of that, Mark.
Wasn't it during the Trump administration that we had the last clusterfuck neocon attempt at a regime change in Venezuela?
Yeah, President
Juan Guaido, the real president. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, well, no, but there was actually something on the ground as well with a bunch of Call of Duty warriors late in the administration. So again, Trump is so inconsistent, and so much of it depends on who is around him and who has talked to and flattered him 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You know, to me at this point, I mean, I'm ready for anything other, you know, anything that's different than the Blinken and Sullivan administration. But we say that from the position we're in now, and we don't know what it's going to be 2 years into a Trump administration. Again, it's just a chaos bomb. I mean, Vance talks a good game on Ukraine, right? Something that would be favorable. But what's he going to do when Russia says, no, we're not interested in a ceasefire. We're not interested in a deal with you. What are they going to do then? And Vance doesn't want the proxy war in Ukraine, but he does want a real war with China and Iran. So
yeah. And that's such a great point, Mark, because, you know, you have all these people saying, and Trump himself says it over and over again, that he's going to bring peace, that the war will be over the not even by the time he's in office, but after he's elected. The day after he's elected, he's going to call Putin and end the war. But like you said, Russia doesn't necessarily seem to be in a position where they need to negotiate. In fact, the war is going pretty well for them. And I'm kind of of the persuasion that, you know, if Russia doesn't stop, they don't feel the need to stop, the regime in Kiev stays in place, then who's better positioned to muster up the jingoism than someone like Trump and JD Vance to actually escalate a conflict if Putin says, you know what, no, we're not going to negotiate with you. But a lot of Americans aren't really considering that possibility.
Yeah, I'm always uncomfortable with Republicans who, because of Trump's I don't know, whims, his admiration for Putin, whatever it is, that suddenly try to be Russia's friend. And I think we need all to remind them, everyone, that Trump will still be the president of the United States, of the hegemon, right? He is not someone who believes in peace. He's not someone who believes in a multipolar world. He's not someone who believes in sovereignty and non-interference. He has no principles whatsoever, other than, the pursuit of money. And we can count on him being attracted by transactional relationships, right? Transactional deals, right? That we know that he thinks that the economic positions of U.S. President McKinley are a good model to follow, but I don't even know, other than a love of tariffs, I don't know where that really places us in the modern world with regards to predicting a Trump foreign policy.
The first impeachment attempt, right? The first impeachment attempt. To your point, he's the president of the United States. We have this longstanding policy of directing arms, logistical support to Ukraine. And the first time, he wanted to condition aid to Ukraine based on a political favor from Zelensky. One, he ended up releasing it anyways. And then he got impeached for it, right? And then there was an impeachment attempt launched against him. So it's just a kind of a reminder there's bigger forces at play.
Yeah, there's forces, and again, Trump is quixotic. He's unpredictable. And when Putin said that actually Russia preferred Biden over Trump because Biden was a predictable Cold War dinosaur, a lot of people thought that was tongue-in-cheek or that he wasn't serious. He was perfectly dead serious. This is nuclear-armed powers dealing with each other. That has to be always at some level in the realm of game theory, right? And strategic thought. You want a predictable opponent. You don't want an opponent who can, again, be swayed one way or another on any issue by, who flattered him last. It could be good. It could be bad. We don't know. And that unpredictability. Now, one of the greatest things I fear is that the Kremlin will lose political will and sometime after liberating all of Donbass, sometime probably next year. Unfortunately, we're, I think, a bit behind schedule. Then we'll stop and cut a deal with Trump, right? And that's a great fear of mine right now. I hope they won't. I hope they remembered what happened with the last Trump administration, with the last Minsk deal, with the January 21st agreement, with every deal that's made with the United States. And how vitriolically anti-Russian all of the current European leaders and elite have been. But at this point, I do not think that Russia can afford to slow down or take their foot off the gas. They have to go for Kiev, and they can't have any type of ceasefires or break in the conflict until then. Even if that takes years into the future, they can't stop, because as soon as they do, it will just be a reset, right? That will give the West time to arm, to drag rump Ukraine into NATO, to train up an officers and NCO corps that has been obliterated in battle. We don't need to go back. The U.S., the West has been very, very slow about recognizing the deficiencies of their military industrial complex and ramping up production of the type of munitions that are necessary for this war: artillery shells, air defense interceptor missiles, even drones. But they're starting, and if you give them 5 years, right, they can pass Russia. It would require major new investments in military spending, but that's not a problem for the U.S. It is a problem for Europe. But the U.S. has $35 trillion of debt and is wrapping up a few more trillion a year. What's another few hundred billion on top of that? It's chump change for them. So I think Russia needs to finish this, and my greatest fear now suddenly is Trump pushing some kind of deal, telling Russia what parts of Ukraine they can keep and what parts they can't keep, and maybe hopefully the Kremlin is well beyond such games, but who knows? I hope so.
Let's see. Let's watch what Trump had to say about Russia in last night's RNC speech.
Under President Bush, Russia invaded Georgia. Under President Obama, Russia took Crimea. Under the current administration, Russia is after all of Ukraine. Under President Trump, Russia took nothing.
I thought it was kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, under Trump, they did stop the U.S. from jihadi regime change in Syria. So, I mean, that most of that was during the Trump years. So
the coup in Turkey as well, the coup in Belarus, the attempted coups as well.
Well, the attempted coup in Turkey is not something I believe the U.S. had any hand in.
Oh, okay.
Perfectly honest, I don't believe that it had anything to do with the story that either the Turkish government presented to us or anything. This was another standard Kemalist military organization in its very nascent stages, and this attempt to blame these Islamic leaders being couched in the U.S. was just sheer opportunism, and it actually had nothing to do with that. I mean, do you really believe that many people in the Turkish Air Force were part of this, Islamist military leaders cult? I don't. And if you will remember Putin's words when Erdogan first asserted what actually happened with that coup attempt, Putin said, he said that's what happened. Who am I to say otherwise? So to me, the number one indication that the U.S. was not actively involved in that is because the U.S. is usually much better at arranging coups and regime changes. There was no elements of political support. There was no NGOs being involved. There was no support on the streets, right? And in fact, Erdogan was able to mobilize his Law and Justice Party on the street, right? When that happens, that's a clear indication to me. The U.S. may have sat back and let it happen and not tried to warn him and been kind of, this is interesting. Should we let him know? No. Let's just stay quiet. Let's see what happens. But no, I don't believe that the commonly accepted story about the Turkish coup, and I don't think that the U.S. was involved in that. But that's just me.
Well, regardless of Trump, the way that he presents international events during his administration, yeah, my read of it is the same as yours, Mark. You know, we might not have seen the same kind of logical, slow moving directionality and progression on multiple fronts, but we had this kind of crazy brinksmanship that felt like at any second things could go just into chaos. But with that said, it's notable that Trump seems to really appreciate and value the respect that he gets from other foreign leaders, including folks from the DPRK, the Taliban, and so on. So I want to play a couple more clips.
Mark is so annoyed. I love this.
It's really, I'm so glad I'm not an American anymore. It is such an embarrassment that this is the best that the American democratic political system can produce, is a choice between Uncle Bernie propped up by Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, or I don't know, is after this weekend, is it going to be Kamala Harris or Michelle Obama or who are they going to, I don't know. And Trump on the other hand. I mean, if JD Vance actually at least strikes me, I mean, he wouldn't be good for the rest of the world. No. Right. Let's be clear about that. Right. He is an American exceptionalist of his own stripe, even if it's not the current stripe of the administration. Again, he would prioritize those three wars differently, and the lowest priority would be Russia, but that might be temporarily good for Russia, but who knows what that it would mean long term. But JD Vance at least is not a blithering idiot, right? He strikes me as a formidable politician. He has military experience. I would not like him, but at least I could probably respect him. I can't respect Joe Biden's corpse or whoever it is. I can't respect Kamala Harris. I can't respect Donald Trump. And
JD Vance is more of a formidable idiot, I'd say. He's the type that's going to say China's buying up all the farmland, and China's the real reason why we're deindustrializing the Midwest. It's the same old shtick. But but in America, we need our octogenarian opium. Mm-hmm. That's where we're at right now. But I'm going to play.
JD Vance has a beard. I mean, that changes everything, doesn't it?
Have you seen him without the beard, though? It's very horrifying.
Yeah, well, that's probably like me without a beard, so I can't really say anything.
I don't know, but he looks very horrifying.
But yeah, without the beard and the eyeliner, you might as well just send him over to a drag show. So let's see what Trump said about the DPRK, though. This is pretty funny.
North Korea is acting up again, but when we get back, I get along with them. He'd like to see me back, too. I think he misses me, if you want to know.
That Kim misses Trump. We're not done yet. There's still more clips, Mark.
Again, when Trump attempted over obviously the heads of his own administration to reach out to North Korea, and it wasn't on impulse a bad thing. I can't speak to Trump's motivations for doing so, but you know, peace. That was a moment where suddenly peace, not just between North Korea and the US, but between North Korea and South Korea seemed possible. Of course, Moon was in South Korea at the time. But I mean, just the way Trump talks about foreign policy gives it upsets every fiber of you know, the idea that politics and geopolitics is a serious game, you know, and it should be something that is being waged by serious people, plotting and calculating against each other. And then we have this come in, and it's like a donkey in a china shop.
Well, maybe I can be devil's advocate and say, do you think that Trump possibly, because of the way he talks about politics, and he kind of makes it seem like a, you know, like a primetime drama or soap, you know, like this is my boy, that's not my boy, and like maybe he got more people interested in politics?
I get a number of Trump followers that misplacedly start to follow me occasionally on social media, and every once in a while I warn them, I mean, you're going to say something stupid or idiotic and I'm going to block you in a very short order of time, so why don't you just fuck off and we can just get past that, right? I'm sorry, I'm not one of these people. I despise the liberals in the United States, but I despise the neocons and the Republicans, and I don't have any respect for the Trumpists or the MAGA communists or whatever flavor of crazy is coming out of.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
Shots fired, Michael. We'll have a discussion about MAGA communism at some point, but I think we should go ahead and play the Taliban clip.
Please,
let
me at least have a couple shots of whiskey before we start that conversation.
Taliban clip.
I need to be pasted for that.
And he said, I understand, Your Excellency. He called me Your Excellency. I wonder if he calls the other guy Your Excellency. I doubt it. The other guy gave him everything. I mean, what kind of a deal was that? He walked out, gave him everything.
There's Trump talking about the Taliban. They called him Your Excellency. I don't think he's probably right.
They would say Your Excellency, honestly, but
I have more respect for the Taliban are smart enough to play Donald Trump. That's what that tells me. That's all that it tells me, is the Taliban are smart enough to probably have a psychological profile of Trump and apply it. That's
we're talking about U.S. politics and, you know, maybe even incorporating EU recent political changes. We're seeing kind of a shift. I don't want to say a shift to the right. I just want to say maybe an uptick in very aggressive far right rhetoric. That here it's more violent and racist, and then in the EU it's more of a populist sort of nationalist. Have you noticed that at all in Russia? Like that we're sliding to the right. I mean, Russia had, I'm just using for example, Russia had the terrorist attacks, unfortunately, at Crocus and whatnot, and immediately everybody in America said it's the Jews, it's Israel. They want Russia to hate their Muslims, and I said that's not even feasible. Why would that happen? But I'm like, everything. Oh, America, a lot of Americans. And, you know, it was an argument that we kept getting in. And I kept saying, you know, that this is Russia's conflict and Russia's business, and it's not yours to kind of co-opt and like use for fodder. But we have completely, this war in Gaza has completely enveloped us in the West. We are completely polarized. And I'm talking like Nazi rhetoric. So I'm wondering if Russia's actually noticing this, like looking at us, because I know Russia has very quickly gets a bit triggered by really apparent Nazi rhetoric. And I'm not kidding when I say that people are using the terms Jewish question in America and things of that nature. So I'm wondering if you've seen any of that, if you've noticed it.
Okay, so I don't know that we can speak about a worldwide or even a European-wide phenomenon of the growth of the right or the far right. I
Well,
mean,
for
certainly,
them, I think it's more of a nationalistic sort of.
even international. Russia, there is right now, but that's a product of the war. And there are, I would say, a few cases of patriotism going overboard, shall we say. And that being said, you know, I wear my stripes on my lapel. But there are cases of it going overboard, but I have confidence every time something goes too far that the Putin administration knocks it down, because he's pragmatic and not driven by nationalism in the populist sense in the slightest. In fact, he is an anti-ethnic nationalist. Putin has always been that, and the Russian government has always, you know, under Putin has always been that. So I have no fears there. I think we're seeing it. It's a little bit more complicated, and sometimes you have to look at it at a country for country basis. If you take France, for years now, there has been a slow erosion of the center right and the center left to forces both on the quote unquote far left and the quote unquote far right, which is even less far. As far as I'm concerned, Marine Le Pen is the closest thing to a de Gaullist in modern French politics. I don't regard her as a right in anything.
No, not at all.
I mean, her economic policies are to the left of U.S. Democrats. I mean, that's we had this really dramatic event that in France, where after eroding slowly, suddenly the center right and the center left collapsed at the same time. Just the bottom fell out of them and they just disappeared. And we were left with a rump neoliberal center under Macron, which is obviously now Macron is probably the most despised political figure in France. And then you had the rise of a loose left coalition under Mélenchon, and you know, this gradual rise of the National Rally Party under Le Pen taking prominence. And yes, deals were cut at the last minute. No respect for the far left there that kept Macron in ostensible power there. But that was a really dramatic event, and it wasn't solely a rise of the right. It was a rise of the left. It was a collapse of this hegemonic center, this game of shuffling between center right and center left parties that by and large are the same thing, just a different set of elite, like we've just seen take place in the United Kingdom. We just saw Keir Starmer, at least in terms of parliamentary account, destroy the Tories. If you actually take a look at popular sentiment, popular vote, rather than say the result of the UK's carefully staged, managed districting, which is pre-programmed to achieve certain results, Keir Starmer only got 33% of UK voters. I mean, that's the big victory that resulted in him having a 67% victory in votes in Parliament. So there's a big divorce between what the actual nationwide popular sentiment is and what that gets translated to because of this districting that carefully manages democratic results. But we saw Keir Starmer, and what is Keir Starmer going to do differently in terms of foreign policy from Rishi Sunak? Nothing. I mean, he might at least rhetorically, talk up an even tougher game on Russia. He doesn't have any military resources left with which to pursue that. On Israel and Gaza, absolutely nothing is going to change. The same thing in Germany. No matter how weak Olaf Scholz and Baerbock's coalition is. If they fell, it isn't the Alternative for Germany or the New Left Peace Party that would take power. It's the Merkel's Christian Democrats that would follow the exact same policy against Russia and Ukraine. So what we saw in France is extraordinary. What we saw in the Netherlands is also very interesting, although it will probably take another year or two before Geert Wilders can actually form a government there or not. They go for years there without actually having a government. It's very weird. But it's the Netherlands, so who really cares? Viktor Orban is obviously more empowered than ever in Hungary, and he is cutting a figure. I mean, whatever they may hate him in the West, the rest of the world suddenly raised up their head and saw an actual statesman in Europe. And even in terms of the European Parliament, Orban has a much stronger hand than he did before. All of this talk about the European technocrats punishing Orban, they don't have the balls to remove Hungary's voting rights from the European Council. They may talk about it, but I don't believe they'll do it. And if they did, it would be great, because that would be such a crack that would begin the shattering of the EU. But they won't go down that road. So, and in Slovakia, you had the rise of Robert Fico, who is far left, right? Not far right, but is often referred to as a quote unquote populist occasionally by the Western media as well. So we are definitely seeing some blowback from the EU's failed sanction war on Russia, but it plays out in different countries in different ways. And where we have these amazing results in Slovakia and France, that isn't necessarily indicative. In Italy, it resulted in the rise of a right figure who was every bit Atlanticist as the government that preceded her. The same thing in Sweden. I don't think it's as simple as talking about a surge in nationalism or populism. It's a lot more complicated than that, and you have to look at each individual country and their political system in isolation, because you can see very different results. I mean, to see Robert Fico and Viktor Orban, a far left and a far right leader, standing together, and Fico saying, "I wish I had been well enough," having survived the recent assassination and attempt to go to Orban. Now, this is a dream of mine, that the only way this hegemonic center-right, center-left dominance of Western politics can be destroyed is by certain elements. I don't like the term far right. Okay, far right is Golden Dawn, yeah, and I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. But Le Pen is a very different beast, and her policies are entirely different. And most of the people in Alternative for Germany as well, or Jobbik in Hungary. But the far left and elements of the alt-right need to realize that they have more in common to defeat the hegemonic center than they have on the opposite end of the polls. The world is not in a 20th century left, right, liberal, conservative divide in politics. And that is because of this triangulation of the center right, center left, as this hegemonic dominance in democratic politics in Western countries. And what is needed to displace them is a recognition that we're not on opposite sides anymore, that it isn't old models of politics, that you need to reconceptualize, respatialize the way that you look in politics, and realize that workers have as much a reason to fear and to question unregulated immigration for economic reasons, for corporations that want a cheap labor force, as right-wing voters who fear the erosion of their culture and history by a new cultural population that can't be assimilated fast enough to moderate, right? Which is not to say that I'm against immigration, but every country needs to decide what their levels of immigration. I'm an immigrant to Russia. I'm not against immigration, but it is perfectly reasonable to talk about regulating that, and that regulation should not be in the interests of neoliberal economics and corporations that want cheap labor at the expense of their own workforce, or at the erosion of the long-standing existing culture and society in the country. That's one issue that really serious leftists, I'm not talking liberal leftists, right? They're hopeless, but leftists should actually be able to come to an understanding with people on the right in Western politics. But in Russia, it's an entirely different political beast, because here the dominant political force is economic statism and moderate social conservatism. That is the Putin model, right? And that is a model that could be imitated elsewhere in Europe, and I think would prove very popular. In the United States, that's a hard sell. That's a different political culture there. I don't see the ability to push that or even to encourage that result there. But European politics can learn, I think, a lot from watching the social political forces in Russia.
But the EU doesn't have to worry about anything. They're looking forward to another administration from Ursula.
If you'll remember the ground shaking previous administrations of the president of the European Commission, I mean, who can forget the incredible world-changing effects that the administration of Juncker had on global politics, or Prodi or Barroso? I mean, Ursula von der Leyen she has a good PR sense. She has a good ability to insert herself into political conversation and pretend that the president of the European Commission is some kind of president of the European Union, and that she has some type of executive power, neither of which are true. Now, however much she might want to make them so. And I think too much is made out of Ursula von der Leyen, and even figures like Borrell, before her and so forth. They were annoying, but did they really have power in Europe? No, the national governments still have power on issues of foreign policy and military policy and so forth. And her saying that she is going to make a strong defensive Europe, well, stronger political figures than her have beaten their heads open, pounding against the wall of a European military force, because the United States doesn't want it. You can't even get most European countries to commit 2% of their national spending on defense for NATO, much less spending more resources on separate military forces outside of that command. And the U.S. very much appreciates that military control of Europe through NATO. They don't want any competition. Now, maybe Trump may have different opinion on that score, but 4 years of Trump is not going to be able to demolish the institutions of NATO in Europe. I don't care. Whatever his sentiment in the entire accomplishment of Trump's first administration is to get a few more NATO countries to spend more on defense. That's hardly a positive outcome. So
I got so many good sound bites out of this episode. I think that, and every time I have you on, I'm just going to ask you the most annoying questions and just see how far I can push you to the edge. That Ursula question really got a good reaction.
I'm so annoyed about talking about European and American domestic politics like they actually
make
matter.
Russia's politics less stable, and then we'll talk about them.
I don't even like talking about Russian. I'm an international relations and security guy. I can opine on political science and domestic politics, but I have no more credibility or specialty than your user.
That just makes you more fun to annoy. Like, you don't understand. You're just
out there,
It just makes it more appealing to annoy you. Like, I hate talking about this. She's making me talk about this.
That's okay. It's Friday. Only you, Sarah, are allowed to do that to me.
I know. That's why I do it. I won't push this hard. Okay, John, take it. Any other closing thoughts before we let him get back to his crows and kvass?
Well, I look forward to the conversation that Mark and I will have about MAGA communism, because I think actually walking us through
are you one of those?
Case.
Are you a MAGA communist? You
and
me. What's his name? Hinkelman or
MAGA communist?
So bodybuilder Hinkelman or Hinkelson or
Hazaldine?
Hinkelson. Yep, that's the one. Hinkelman and Hinkelstein.
I don't know what his name is. Anyway,
but libertarian Stalinism, maybe. Would you like that better? But
libertarianism in its original sense.
It was a good conversation. We wanted to talk about the front lines in Ukraine too.
You are a smart guy, John, and when you're 50 and as bitter and cynical by politics as I am, then we'll have a conversation. Even if they have to trot me in on some Biden life support machine or something at the time. But
before we go though, Mark, could you give us a quick Ukraine update for the people?
Yeah. Okay, so obviously Russia is making quicker gains on the battlefield, right? That's no question. We've seen just in the last 48 hours, first of all, there was the breakthrough in New York and Toretsk, evidently, among other things, both facilitated, one, by the Kiev regime transferring out troops to Kharkov and elsewhere because they don't have enough, combat ready troops at this point, and they have to shuffle them back from front to front to front. So which tells me Russia needs to open more fronts. But it was also facilitated by the Donbass coal miners digging two more tunnels, the tunnel warfare that were instrumental both in the New York breakthrough and in the direction of Toretsk as well. There was two new tunnel warfare episodes there that were quite tactically successful for Russian forces. So that's the specialty of Donbass coal miners there, and it's good to see it actually being put to use.
Yeah, the mole people living up to the stereotype.
But we also saw breakthroughs at Eurozhina. We saw we possibly something is really finally starting in Sumy. There's a lot of there was a lot of artillery prep, and now the Kiev regime, Budanov was warning about some critical threat to the north, and the Kiev regime is talking that they threw back Russian DRG groups. We don't know what's really happening right there. At least I don't. I haven't heard that anyone knows because both sides are playing it real quiet to their chests. But we also saw important breakthroughs in Chasiv Yar in the last week, and supposedly some in the direction of progress and the supply lines there from Selidova and Pokrovsk. Russian forces, a small group of Russian forces, cut across this major highway that delivers supplies south to Ugledar. and that possibly had some connection with Shoigu suddenly flying out to that front. That may be an indication that Russia's looking to see if they can exploit that unexpected sudden advance to a greater extent. But again, these are still, this isn't very quick, big maneuver, right? This is an increasing of the rate of attrition, right? Advances where, maybe two tree lines are taken instead of one tree line, or a settlement is taken every week, or something along those lines. My optimistic, and I don't do optimism. My optimistic hope for this year was that by autumn, that Russia would be moving on Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, and we could say that by the new year that was all but over, that it was not finished, but just about finished. And I don't think we're going to get to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk this year at this point. We're not advancing fast enough. And we have to keep in mind how much more remains to be taken. Seversk, Toretsk in New York have to be finished. Chasiv Yar, progress, but it's been going on for months. The supply lines, have to be cut at Pokrovsk and Selidova to choke off Ugledar, which will still have to be taken. Kupansk, Liman, Izum, all of this needs to be taken before Russian forces can move on that last defensive line in Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. That is time. That is still time. And the advance is faster, but it's not fast enough. And the Kiev regime forces are buckling. And we saw, these isolated incidents where they're surrendering. You could say we're seeing a few more of those, but the Kiev regime military is not breaking yet. And a lot of people, I think, even 2 months ago, were talking like the Kiev regime military was going to be broken at this point, and that Russians would be riding victoriously into Kiev. And I'm all for that, and I believe it will happen, but I don't believe it's going to happen quite on the time frame that some more optimistic analysts, cheerleaders of the conflict would like it to happen. I would love to see it happen in that time frame too. I just don't think that it is realistic. I'm very concerned with the unpredictability of a Trump administration, of what will happen next year with this conflict. On one hand, we see Duda in Poland saying that NATO and Russia war is this close, and if Russia achieves victory, that means NATO will have to go to war with Russia. And on the other hand, we see Germany announcing they're going to cut Ukrainian military funding in half, down to $4 billion. So we're getting conflicting signals. But I would hope that in order to achieve the minimum political results that Russia needs to achieve here, as far as I'm concerned, which is the minimum is East Ukraine, right? A division of the country with Odessa and Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and Kryvyi Rog. If that has to be pounded out on the battlefield, I don't know that the Kiev regime military will suffer the collapse that people seem to think it will. I hope it does. But if they simply fall back on an all defensive position and military aid from the West is continued, simply the equation of forces and offense and defense. Offense in this near peer conflict is hard, and Russia has to go about it in a very slow and methodical way in order to minimize casualties on their side, which they're doing very well. But it's still hard, and it takes time. And I think if we're taking a look for East Ukraine at a minimum, that's too much time. That's years. Unless the Kiev regime's military just suddenly says we can't fight anymore. And I can't really conceive of that at this point. Maybe we'll see more dramatic erosion. It's hard to see what is happening behind the hood, but the West can keep up support of Ukraine at a lower rate that will still make Russian advances slow and hard. Right? It was particularly if the Kiev regime does what they should have done and not fight for every square meter and every village. That's why I think what Russia really needs to do is to mobilize. I think Russia needs to mobilize 1 million men, and they need to go for Kiev, and they need to finish this, and they need to inflict political terms, claiming what territory in Ukraine they're going to take at a minimum. Again, I would prefer to see at this point removing the Kiev regime entirely and a military occupation of West Ukraine, no matter how painful that will be. And I believe it will be a guerrilla war that would last probably for the rest of my life at the very minimum. If decades of Stalin and the Soviet Union couldn't get banderism out of West Ukraine, I seriously doubt that a soft Putin would be able to do so. But all of that is preferable to NATO turning whatever rump Ukraine is left into a warrior cased and battle platform directed at Russia, which is why Russia, in my opinion, can't afford to stop. There cannot be a ceasefire. You know, faster is better than slower at some point, because we don't know what the future holds. But everything is positive at the moment, right? The military industrial complex is going our way. Air superiority is going our way. F-16s are a joke. I look forward to seeing them shot out of the sky by Russian air defense and air-to-air missiles. It's going to be very entertaining, and to watch Western liberal war hawks, fantastical hopes be crushed. That's going to be absolutely fantastic. But at the end, it will always be the question, and Macron said it very well it's already a couple of months ago, that at some point it may be necessary to send Western troops if Putin doesn't stop. Well, what is the stop? What is the red line for the West? Is it the Donbass, right? If Russia stops at the Donbass, the West will probably not send troops directly in. And then I think Kherson and Zaporozhye are kind of on the iffy line there. But if Russian forces start moving towards Kharkov or Odessa, which is really, it's going to have to go the long way around. So we'll be talking about Kiev long before we'll be talking about Odessa. They're going to have to do something. They can't afford, unless there is some radical political regime change in the West. And is Trump alone enough to do that? I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't know that anyone does, because I do not have confidence that anyone can predict what Trump will do or won't do a year into the future. So I want this finished. I want Russia to take the steps that are necessary. They can engage in negotiations all they want, just no ceasefires, right? And
No ceasefires.
And maximalist demands. I mean, I don't think much of the new Zhirinovsky, also known as Medvedev, but Medvedev 2.0, whatever you want to call him. But I agree with him completely with the rhetoric that he is putting out. Because Russia has to go for the maximalist goals here. They have to. Anything that is left will just reignite into a war a few years in the future. And right now we're winning. So why give that an opportunity for the situation to change? However long it takes. But I think that Russia is capable of a more dramatic military momentum. And I believe that Russian society is willing to do that. I do not believe it will cost Putin domestically to announce a 1 million man mobilization. Russia still has, 2 million reservists that are capable of being called on before even talking about, people who haven't served in the military. So, but everything is positive, but it's not positive in a dramatic way that some people are expecting. And I'm perfectly willing to see this through for years, but just hoping that next month the Kiev regime military is going to collapse and is not going to fight anymore. I don't think it's likely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't see it in the cards yet.
Well, Mark, I really appreciate you giving us an extra bonus 20 minutes to let us torture you. And I hope you do have a good weekend with your boss. Some super chats I'd like to read. John is rocking the open shirt and gigolo gold chain. So we got one noticer, John. Thank you, speaking the truth.
Oh, wow. I mean, that wink right there is going to win the hearts of every
we'll timestamp
MAGA communist devushka out there, John.
And we have a joke. We'll end it on a positive. Thanks to sincere sentinel of sentience and sapiens. Did you guys hear about the recent wind chill? Reports have it that the weather was so cold in Kiev overnight that witnesses actually spotted Zelensky with his hands in his own pockets this time. So that's your joke for the weekend. It was fun torturing Mark. And go visit
It was
Mark's,
great.
Mark.
It was great. We had the dark cloud. We had the dark cloud come in, hit the ICJ, came in, it hit the RNC, it hit the European Union, and then we had a very nice ray of sunshine break through and give us a nice analysis of the Ukraine war.
Yeah,
so
good news on the Ukraine front. Well, thank you, Mark.
So
Everybody
much,
go follow Mark. Hopefully next week we have Ritter and something about the UK protests and the Ireland protests. We'll get on it for you guys. And MAGA communism.
Yeah, John and I are obviously going to have that conversation. Hopefully,
I will give him your contact.
When we're both liquored up for that one. May I just say that I've seen you appearing on Rachel Blevin's show a few times, and very nice, very nice. You're a very it's welcome to see you there.
Thank you very much.
I think he's talking to me.
I was. Yeah.
Oh, I've been on this week too. So.
Have you been on Rachel Blevin's too?
Earlier this week, what did I talk about? Man, I talked about U.S. domestic politics.
Fabulous.
Go follow Rachel, everyone, right now on YouTube. She's fantastic and she's gorgeous. So go follow Rachel. She always has Mark on. So you get the beauty and the beast.
You know how many times I've seen that in the comments, and I guess it's complimentary in some fashion. Although Rachel deserves more than just comments about her physical appearance, which is
awesome. She's probably one of the best interviewers in the game.
And she lets me, much like you, talk without interrupting me with stupid questions. When it's necessary. So I appreciate that.
And thank you, Mark. All right. Guys,
follow DD.
DD, Rachel, Mark, John, MAGA Communist, Jackson. Follow everybody. Follow Samira. Follow the
Jackson. That's his name. Jackson.
Jackson Hinkelstein. Area. Take us out. Have a good weekend. Area. Play.